on the video, you can turn off your camera. Thank you, Nicole. So the recording is on now. And hello, everyone. Nicole and I are very happy to welcome you today at the Art and Conversation Seminar. Our topic for today is Art and Science Collaboration Projects. So we're going to have our two speakers present, and then after that we'll have a discussion. So during the discussion, everyone will have a chance to ask a question or add a comment. But now we begin with our first speaker, is Johan Wagemans, full professor of experimental psychology at KU Leuven University. His research focuses upon the psychology and neuroscience of visual perception as well as art perception. He brought together the leading scholars on perceptual organization in order to integrate early century views of Gestalt psychology with modern viewpoints inspired by modern cognitive psychology and neuroscience. For his significant contribution, in 2020, he received the Ernest John Solvay Excellence Award in Humanities and Social Sciences from the Research Foundation Flanders. Professor Wagemans, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We are very happy to have you today. So whenever you're ready, please share your screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marina, for this lovely introduction. And thank you, Marina and Nicole, for inviting both me and Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven to talk about art-science collaboration, which is really a topic that is close to my heart. So I will start sharing my screen. Can you let me know whether that is all right like this?
Yes, fantastic.
Yeah, all right. So I will talk about art-science collaboration first a little bit in general, and then I will discuss in more detail the collaboration with Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven and other artists in the Parallelepiped project, and I will end with some specific reflections on this collaboration. So first, some general statements about art and science. I think everyone knows that they are really different entities, but I also want to point out that there are some important commonalities between them. I think both art and science always start from raising questions and seeking answers. And the trigger is often a problem or a struggle with questions of life and often big themes that I think is a shared interest in art and science. There's also in both artists and scientists an inner force, an irresistible need to know and an urge to understand. So I think that is also common between both fields. And also both present a model of reality based on a process of research and discovery. Although the form of knowledge that is generated by research and discovery is quite different in each of these domains, and there's different ways of giving meaning. So I will start elaborating a little bit on the different forms of knowledge in the both domains. So for science, I think we aim for testable models of elementary features of the world in general, whereas in art, we aim for subjective impressions or expressions of an ambiguous reality that is experienced in daily life. So that's quite different from the sciences. In science, it's about tests that require objective measurements, trying to remove the subjective elements as much as possible and aimed at replication. Whereas in art, the focus is on subjective elements, not aimed at replication, but each time, in a sense, a unique experience, a unique product. In science, the thinking mode generally is analysis, reduction, and deduction, whereas in art, the thinking mode is more synthesis, association, and induction. So quite different thinking modes. Scientists think formally deductive and abstract, whereas artists tend to think more intuitively. They use like tacit knowledge and intuition, and they also think more concretely. Of course, I'm sketching a very general dichotomy. It's not always that opposite, but just to make it clear that science and art are indeed different entities. Also, in terms of the output, sciences usually produce text to communicate knowledge, whereas in art, the output is usually non-textual artifacts embodying the knowledge in one way or the other. And in science, the required attitude is taking distance, whereas in art, it's about taking part and engagement. In science, all that matters is really in the text, whereas in art, the message must be extracted in the interaction between the artwork and the experience, something that is known as the beholder's share, a term introduced by Ernst Gombrich. So if you look at these differences between arts and science, you can imagine that art-science collaboration is far from trivial. It's not an easy thing to do if you start from such big differences between both domains. And yet we see more and more examples of art-science collaboration around the world, both in the past, but especially in recent years, and I expect this to become more strong in the future as well. So despite these differences, it is possible to start collaborating, I think. So the concrete project that I want to discuss is called Parallelepiped, which is an initiative by the University of Leuven, the City Museum M, and many other players in the cultural sector in Leuven. It ran from 2008 to 2010 with very limited funding, and we ended with a joint exhibition at the City Museum of M that ran between January and April in 2010. And our part in the collaboration, but it was a larger project, our part was between experimental psychology and 3 visual artists that we collaborated with. So the 3 visual artists are Ruud Loos, who is working more in graphics, Wendy Morris, who is a South African artist who makes animated movies on historical themes, and then Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven, who was the central artist in the Parallelepiped project, and with whom I've collaborated rather intensely, as we both will describe in more detail next. So I will discuss 2 example projects. The first is a PET study on brain mechanisms in creativity, and the second one is an eye tracking study with calligraphy, a series of drawings by Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven. So first, the PET study on brain mechanisms in creativity. This was really a collaborative project between 2 research groups. So nuclear medicine was involved for the PET scan, and then experimental psychology as well. And what we wanted to study was the neural basis of creative drawing, including the mental aspects, the visual aspects, the motor aspects. And we started from an embodied cognition approach, including all of these components of creativity. And we looked for possible differences between artists and non-artists. And the reason we used PET rather than fMRI is that you have less space for a drawing tablet and a pen in the fMRI scanner compared to the PET scanner, and it produces too much disturbing noise, so it would distract from drawing more creatively, in contrast to the PET scanner, which is a quiet instrument. So the participants were 11 artists, including several of the artists that were involved in Parallelepiped. So Ronnie Delru, Nick Erving, Wendy Morris, Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven, and Koen van Mechelen, for instance. Some of these people are really well known, at least in Belgium, and some of them also internationally. And we also had 10 non-artists that were matched for age, gender, and education level. And they didn't have creative experience through their profession, hobby, or education. We included some screening on psychopathology, on visual spatial constructability and neurological diseases with questionnaires. And the main thing was that we basically applied the Torrance test of creative thinking, the figurative part, as our measure of creativity. And the essence of PET is that you introduce some radioactive tracer that marks brain areas that are more active in a specific task. And interesting to know is that the half-life of that tracer is 2 minutes. So we always had to wait like 10 to 12 minutes between the different scans in the different runs, which makes it a very laborious and tiring study for participants. This is how it looks. So here you see a participant lying in the scanner with the head in the coil and the drawing tablet on the belly, and then you can pick pen and draw digitally on the tablet. That is like the way it was done in the study. So the main design is that we had 12 trials per participant, 4 different tasks with 3 repeated measurements each. And the 4 tasks were created to be orthogonal components in a 2x2 factorial design. So we had 2 creative tasks, 2 non-creative tasks. We had 2 active tasks and 2 passive tasks. So the creative active task is you get a seed, a little element on the screen, and you start drawing creatively. In the non-creative version, you do manual tracking of a trace that was drawn by another person. So the activity in terms of motor activity is the same, but it doesn't involve any creativity at all. In the passive conditions, people didn't have to do anything in the motor domain, so they got a seed. In the creative imagining condition, they got a seed and they have to imagine drawing rather than actually conducting the drawing. And in the fourth condition, the non-creative passive task, they had to visually track the same trace, but not in the motor domain, not by using the cursor, just visually. That's how the design was composed in a 2x2 factorial design. So I will show an example movie in the creative drawing task from Anne-Mie. So I hope this will work. I'll start. This is like the little seed, and then she starts drawing. So those people who know Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven and her work will immediately recognize the style of her drawing. She will show other pictures later on. This is really how she normally drives. So a little seed for her is enough to start drawing the kind of drawings that she usually makes. This is at normal speed, and now we'll speed up. This is the total drawing that she made from that little seed that she got in the beginning. In the second condition, the manual tracking task, I will show an example movie of a control person. So here's the little seed and the drawing, and then you see the cursor of the participant who tries to follow the drawing made by another person. So nothing creative here, but similar type of motor behaviors to follow the trace of another participant. It's always a little bit lagging behind. So if you see the original person drawing somewhere, you suddenly have to jump with your cursor to try to follow that. So in terms of visual and motor components, it's quite related, but it's absolutely non-creative. Then the creative imagining task is similar to the creative drawing, but without actually drawing. So you get a seed like this from the Torrance test, and then you have to imagine making a drawing. So the creativity is the same, but without the visual and the motor components. And then the visual tracking task is the same as the manual tracking task, but now without the mouse cursor. So the video is played, people watch, but don't actually follow it by the mouse cursor. So visual is similar, but no motor components. So here are some drawings by artists. If you know some of the artists, you might recognize some of the drawings. This, for instance, is from Wendy Morris. This one is from Koen van Mechelen. And these are drawings from the control group, so they also do their best to make a drawing, but they're somewhat less artistic, I would say. In the analysis, but I won't go into the details, we have artists by conditions, controls by conditions, and then we can do different comparisons in the analysis. I guess those people familiar with experimental designs can imagine how we do the subtractions, creative versus non-creative, active versus non-active, artist versus controls, etc. So I'll show some results, but I won't go into the details because that is not really important for this talk. But here at the left, you see the activations during the creative tasks. So in comparison to the tracking tasks, you see some strong prefrontal cortex activity and some anterior cingulate gyrus activity, which is related to attention. You also see some deactivations in different brain areas in the creative tasks compared to the non-creative tasks. The nice thing about this is that you can also look at individual patterns for different artists. And at the left, I've shown activations and deactivations for Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven. And what is quite striking is that she has much less prefrontal cortex activity as the average participant, which you see both here and here. And if you compare to Wendy Morris, which is another artist in the study, you see that she has more prefrontal cortex activity. And in fact, this reflects also the different ways of drawing and the different strategies that the artists use. Wendy Morris explained afterwards that she was already thinking in advance, if I get a seat, what will I draw? So she's very much planning ahead and really trying to control the things that she draws. Whereas Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven, she explicitly said, it's the hand that does the drawing. I don't think about it. It just flows automatically. She doesn't need the same active cognitive control as other artists. And that is nice to see in the individual patterns as well. So here you see some general blood flow differences. No, I'm sorry, activation differences between artists and non-artists during the creative task. So if you want to know what is different in creativity in artists versus non-artists, that's the kind of comparison you want to do. But basically you see that it's the same prefrontal areas in both groups, but the activations are somewhat larger in the artist group compared to the non-artist group. And then you can also see general blood flow differences between artists and non-artists actually in all conditions, not just the creative conditions. And here I show this for the creative drawing. This is the comparison you do by subtraction, and you see much more activity in the artists than in the non-artists. But it's really important to emphasize that this is not only the case for the creative versions of the tasks, but also the non-creative ones. So some conclusions from this study. That is that the left prefrontal cortex is important for visual creativity in both active and passive conditions. Artists and non-artists have a comparable average activation pattern for the different conditions, but artists show a generally increased cortical activity in all of the conditions. It's as if they generate much more their brains in doing all these tasks in the PET study as we conducted it. So this was the PET study, very briefly. The second is the eye tracking study with calligraphy. Calligraphy is a series of 15 drawings, and we presented them 20 seconds each. So I will show each of these drawings one by one, but not for 20 seconds. I'll just give you an impression of what these drawings are. This is the first one. I'll come back to that later on. Second, there's always a combination of shapes and colored surfaces and text as well. Sometimes some furniture included, sometimes some biological organs, sometimes some room or spatial features, often these colored shapes. Here's another one. This is the central one in the series, so really the middle one, and that's not accidental. Here you see some more. Maybe Anne-Mie will say a little bit more about this type of drawings later on. I just wanted to show you the visual characteristics of these drawings. So we presented each of them for 20 seconds each, and we presented them twice in 2 different viewing sessions. So first run, second run, 15 drawings each for 20 seconds. And we had 3 participant groups, which I think is one of the nice features of the design. We had novices that were completely unfamiliar with Anne-Mie's work. We had experts who knew Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven as an artist and who were familiar with her way of drawing and making art. And then we also involved Anne-Mie as the artist in the study, which is also a nice thing. We could track eye movements of these different groups in comparison to Anne-Mie's eye movements. And I do remember anecdotally when we first asked her whether she wanted to participate and have her eye movements tracked in the study, she said, well, I'm not going to make eye movements because I see my drawings in a single glance. I'm not going to make eye movements. That is what she said. But then if you actually look at the results, here are the scan paths. So each circle is a fixation and they're numbered in sequence. And then you see some lines in between them connecting all the different fixations by the saccades. But she is actually the participant making most eye movements of all, most fixations of all. So rather than saying that she didn't move her eyes at all, she moved her eyes most of all in comparison to the other participants. But what you do see is that she's always anchoring her eye movements to the center. It's as if she captures the whole drawing by framing it, by centering it in the middle of the composition. And that might correspond to the impression that she had, that she will look at it at a single glance. If you look at the novices, this is a rather typical example of a novice who goes around, then sticks to the text and stays there for most of the time. So people when looking at images like this, at drawings like this, they are a bit confused and they want to understand, and often they want to have some text and they hope that the text will explain the drawing, but that is of course not what Anne-Mie does. She includes citations of philosophers or scientists in her work, and the text doesn't really explain the drawing. So people get a bit stuck in the text, but they don't get that much out of it, I'm afraid. So they're really reading. Here is an example of an expert who captures more of the composition. If you look at how the eye movements and fixations are divided over the whole composition, and they also explore some of the visuals in the corner here, but not as much as the novices. So in general, the conclusion we drew from this study is that the more similar someone's eye movement behavior is to the original artist, they also enjoyed the composition most. They also appreciated the artworks most. So if the eye is taken by the artist across the whole composition, then people start to appreciate it more. That was a general conclusion from this eye tracking study. Now, the nice thing is that we also were able to present the results in the exhibition afterwards. So here you see the series of 15 next to the screens that we had where we played the animations of the eye tracking. So here was the original drawing. Then we had a condition from the novices, a condition from the experts, and a condition from the artists. And the openings in the image that you see here are where people fixate most. So it's like making it transparent where most of the fixations land. And this was how the exhibition was set up in the room dedicated to Anne-Mie's work. And this was one of them. And this was really an area that was appreciated very well by the participants and also by Anne-Mie herself. She liked the fact that there were some animations of the eye movements together with the static drawings. So I will end with some specific reflections on this kind of collaboration. I have written a paper about that in a special issue in eye perception, a special issue on art and perception, where I basically looked back at the Parallelepiped project and drew some conclusions from myself. So this is open access. Everyone can read that paper if they want. So first, about the nature of the collaboration. It was quite intense, quite intensive, and also extensive. So it was extensive in the sense that there were many different projects. I just mentioned two of them, but with the other artists, I had other projects, and other scientists had other collaborations with other artists. So it was quite extensive. It ran for 3 years, and actually we continued some collaborations afterwards as well. It was also very intensive in the sense that we spent a lot of time on that, and it was really hard labor to get all of these projects done. In terms of time investment, for me personally, this was one of the collaborative projects where I spent most of my personal research time in the collaboration with the artist compared to other collaborations I had. It was also quite intense. This is really a collaboration that is much more personal than other types of collaborative research, and also much more complicated to get going and to finish successfully. There are also some limitations about these art-science collaborations that I want to mention. I think it's fair to say that they are less easy to publish in traditional outlets. There's not that many journals who would publish this type of research. So the question is whether there's alternative journals for that. We basically started a new journal, Art and Perception, where that kind of collaborations would be most welcome. You could also consider a monograph on collaboration like this of joint exhibitions and catalogs and websites, so non-traditional outlets from a scientific point of view. Also, I think it's important to mention that it's less easy to obtain funding for this collaboration. As I mentioned, we got very limited funding from the university and the city, but actually not enough to conduct it. So you could only conduct it if you would chip in some money from other grants. I think it might have become a bit more easy to obtain funding for this type of collaboration, but at the time it was absolutely not trivial. And as I mentioned, there are important barriers between the disciplines. I started by saying that there's many differences. And even if the artists and the scientists are enthusiastic which I think is a necessary condition for this type of collaboration. But even when they are enthusiastic, the other players in the sector must also follow. So the museum directors, the staff, the curators, the public, the media. And this is absolutely not trivial, especially collaborations with museums are absolutely not so evident. And final thing that I want to say about this is that it really requires a long-term effort. So it has to grow if you want to start a collaboration like this. You have to invest time and energy and passion into it. So my personal evaluation is that it's definitely worth doing this. I must say, as a scientist, I've been changed by being engaged in a collaboration like this. It has affected my way of looking at art and science quite strongly, both literally and metaphorically. So I see more in artworks now than I used to do. I see more different aspects, more dimensions, more perspectives, more layers, more connections, etc. So I have a richer way of looking at artworks and appreciating artworks. And I also appreciate more different ways of performing research rather than the standard laboratory experiments that I used to do. This is really completely different, but I do see the added value of it. So in general, and as a final conclusion, I would like to say that I've enjoyed this project a lot, and I hope Anne-Mie will say the same, but I'm looking forward to what she will be saying about this. I'll stop sharing my screen. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much, Johan, for such a rich presentation. I will now introduce our second speaker, who is Anne-Mie van Kerckhoven, known also as AMVK. She is a Belgian artist whose works involve painting, drawing, textile, computer art, and video art. A feminist tone pervades all her work, in which the erotic meets machine fetishism, and she explores the relation between art, science, politics, and social issues. For years, she worked in the periphery of the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in Brussels, where she explored the uneasy accessible area of the unconscious. And hence, she positions herself within a reviving tradition where scientists and artists try to collaborate to attempt to achieve a more humane society. So, Anne-Mie, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to your talk.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak about the project from my point of view. Probably a lot here and there things will overlap what Johan has said, but this is actually the view of participating artists. So first I will talk about the project in general, then I will show some drawings, and then answering your question whether we are living in different worlds, scientists and artists. So first of all, as I'm concerned, the Parallelepiped project started on the moment curator Edith Dove convinced me to participate with an art and science project instigated by the University of Leuven. The project was already going on for a while with several other artists, as Johan said, who were involved with the university because of the PhD they were preparing. This art and science project was an initiative of the KUL board together with Museum M, as I know it. The other participants I didn't know about, like the city of Leuven, but anyway. And where the whole, in the Museum M, the whole project was going to be presented in an exhibition in April of 2010. As I recall it, it was in 2007, but maybe it was 2008, that I was asked. But at that moment, I was already an independent artist for more than 30 years. And at that same time, still a teacher at the Royal Academy in Ghent, in Belgium. From the beginning of my career as an artist, I have been involved in exchanges with fellow creatives who eventually became very important scientists, especially in artificial intelligence, as you heard, and this from the late 70s on. My whole body of work has been and is impregnated by a certain approach that can be looked at as scientific. That is why the curator asked me to participate as a kind of umbrella artist. Each artist in this project had a specific scientist to dialogue with. Because of my special situation, I had been assigned two. At least I think it was because of my umbrella situation. The two departments in the university were interested to work with me. experimental psychology and nuclear medicine. My task was to put up the collaboration with both departments during the next years. First of all, the contact with the psychologues, Professor Gerry Diedewalle, who was still in charge then in the beginning of the experimental psychology, and Professor Johan Wagemans, who took over later. On the one hand, I had contact with them, and on the other hand, with medical scientist Professor Koen van Laren. In the beginning, our exchange was limited with exchanging information and hints for interesting publications to read. On a human level, things immediately fell into place. However, at that specific moment in my life, when this was happening, there was no brand new topic I had an urge to work around. Since I was in the middle of a long-going and important phase of archiving all the artwork I had been doing so far, and because of the diving in and the archiving of my past creative itinerary, I started to find myself quite distanced from the person I had been all my life. So it seemed to me kind of logical to present myself as a case. From in the beginning, when we gathered as a group to learn about the ongoing research of our scientists, I got intrigued by two main points in their investigations. The focus of Johan on retinal after images and the occurring of spontaneous mental images in the brains of cannabinoid addicts in Koen's research. The two subjects also in their combination didn't let me go. Links with personal interests pushed forward. For instance, the spontaneous images created ritually by shamans, psychedelica in general, the art of perspective as a symbolic form, but also the remarks I once read of Dadaist Marcel Duchamp on retinal experiments. And of course the theory MLB, Mutterleibversenkung, that filmmaker Eisenstein refined at the end of his life. In the middle of the project, I became puzzled by the input of both the scientists. As a matter of fact, things started to melt together in my brain, which made me at a certain point invite them both at the same time in my studio to look at my most recent work. I hoped the confrontation would force a certain focus for me. Johan and Koen didn't know each other before. In my opinion, a possibility was somewhere. Indeed, driving together in the car from Leuven to my studio, something happened. They conceived a collaboration. I decided that sideways to this inspiring fact, I found my way to evaluate into something new in the very fertile area where incompatibilities meet. Practically what they decided upon was to organize an investigation in the nuclear medicine wing of Gasthuisberg, the University Hospital in Leuven, that is Van Laren's working area. All the artists of the project were invited to make different kinds of drawings while lying in the PET scanner. Nuclear medicine uses radiopharmaca, radioactive substance, in very small and harmful doses to look at certain brain activities. We got injected and had to lie down in the scanner and make drawings following certain indications psycholog Wagemans prepared. So they could observe which brain areas by each artist were lit up while making images. This was very interesting and revealing for me personally, because they found out that all the fields in my brain were lighting up during the act of drawing, which explains my ability of dealing with lots of influences and levels of cognition at the same time, with no hierarchy, which ends, of course, not always in a positive way. The Parallelepiped project was definitely challenging because we were different kinds of artists, with different convictions too. The regular meetings weren't always easy, but in the end quite constructive. The dialogue with the scientists happened in parallel with the search of the fellow artists. This created a positive sharpness. And there was the happy self-evidence that the inquiries in art and in science were looked upon by everybody in the same way, on the same level. In group, we commented in a critical way on each other's work. We listened to each other's talks and we visited each other's exhibitions. The last summer before the final presentation at Museum M, we appeared even and talked as a team in a symposium in Benasque, in Spain. The name was Art and Science Exploring the Limits of Human Perception. I called my exposé Shadow Meets Mirror. Other conferences followed in the museum in Brussels and everything, where we spoke together as a group around Johan. Now I will show some drawings, because I have to say first, the drawings that Johan used for the eye movement project were drawings I made before I met him, and before I met, I was asked for the project. These drawings I made actually already under the influence of my my contact with Johan. As I can see, you cannot read very well the texts on the images. That's a pity. Of course, I cannot read everything, and actually there is quotes in English, in Flemish, and in French on it. But the first quote is art pollution, and the last one is distribution and control and contractarian ethics. I have to say that when I read texts on occasions, and especially when I'm making drawings or before or so, I like to use these quotes as aesthetical components in to add to the meaning of the whole, as the forms and the colors and the materials in which I put the colors on the paper are conveying. So it's some kind of an amalgam of knowledge representation in my way of doing it. I've been doing these kind of drawings already from, actually, when I left the academy, when I as a young person of 23 years old, I started to enter the more adult world and have to take responsibilities for my days to occupy. These drawings, actually, they are a part of my creativity that is apart from all the rest. And I have to say that this is a direct link. They make a direct link with my subconscious. It is like, I think they have the same function for other people. What dreams are? It's like in the dreamlike atmosphere, and they help me to keep my feet on the ground. And actually, at a certain point, I started to look at these kind of drawings as mandalas, but also as some kind of illuminated drawings, as you had in Middle Ages, you see. But there the text was central, and the images were around. And here, of course, it's different, but you could see it's an evolution in these kinds. So next, please. Next, yeah. I will show some of them. So go on. For instance, like the last one. Wait a minute. Was called, like, going back one, please. Two. Yes. Yeah. This one is called Imagination and Captation of Time. The next one. It's I don't have a lot of light here. It's about hidden images, superiority of images, and forbidden images. Next one. This is kind of self-evident. It's a plant growing in the middle of a woman who is not supposed, or maybe she can speak from her womb. Next one. Next one, please. Yeah, that's another one. Very loose, very gentle, about an image. It's around a beautiful image I found somewhere of a woman. And I found then in a book on notorious problems, the inside, the working of an arm, and then other things around it. But yeah, for that you should really go into the image and talk about it. It is also so that the putting together of all the elements on a sheet of paper like that, for me, is a very intuitively and a very pleasant thing. And it's about beauty and truth. But actually, at the moment itself, of course, I'm very focused, and it's sometimes years later that I understand what this was about. Yeah, next one. This is actually a drawing that I made under the influence of, and there were some things that Johan said to me were written on, and yeah, actually I didn't know. I only found it out yesterday that it was like that. It is about visual After Effects and investigation of visual processes. And to that, I linked linear or pictorial on the surface or in the depth. Yeah, it's a whole amalgam of explanations. Then the next one. Yeah, these are others. But I don't have enough time to go over them all because I still have some text to read. Next. Yeah, this is a shamanistic thing, actually. It's one of the best drawings I made during these moments of, you see the influences of perspective. Then you have these orbs, these benevolent orbs. And then there is this Flemish text by a shaman who says that he's undergoing on a simultaneously experiences of being here and being very far away, and that he shows his insight and gives away his insight at the same moment that he stays himself completely himself. Yeah, next. This is actually also a drawing that I made based on notes I made when I met Koen van Laren in his office at the hospital, and he was talking about slow brain chemistry. And what I did was note down words that I got intrigued by, but I actually didn't understand anything what he was saying. It went so quick and it was so complicated. But I was immediately, I fell in love with the words, with the kind of words. And after a while, I made a drawing and I put these words into some kind of an act, as you would say, a theater play. And I showed the drawing afterwards to Koen, and he said, "How is this possible? You understood completely what I was talking about." And this isn't true. But somehow, in this image, I made the connections. I made connections that revealed what the content of the thing was. And this, of course, is very weird because I still don't know, but somehow I made good connections and I made good associations. Yes, next. These are still other works that I made under the influence of the contacts. That's hybrid media plot, it's called. Further. Yes, next. Some more. The title of this one is here. Sorry. No, I can't. Do I have it there? Yes. No, I can't read it. It's about reality. Yeah, I can't read it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, anyway, go on. Next. Next, please. Next. Next. Just to give you an impression. That was the last one. I showed like 40 drawings during the exhibition. Next image, please. Yes, this is the wall where that you already saw, where Johan showed his conclusions, actually, or what you were the brain activity in the people's brains while they were looking at these drawings of me. Then next one. That was an overview of the exhibition with a lot of people looking at it. It was very fantastic that there was such a lot of interest in all these different kinds of not so easy compatible worlds that are part of my creative world. Next one. And this is the one of the drawing walls that were shown. Then next image, please. Yes. So I will go on with my lectures. So these intense years of interaction gave me insight in the phenomena of retinal after images and spontaneous brain imaging. My artistic brain almost collapsed by the combination of this fighting information. The psychoaesthetical research of Professor Wagemans led me from the phenomenon of the retinal after-image towards history, reflection, confusion, duality, and the mirror. Koen van Laar's investigation led me from spontaneous brain imaging in the head of the drug addicted towards the idea of novelty seeking, the subconscious memory, the shadow of our minds, in our minds. The two phenomena, mirror and shadow, cling together when we speak about art. Art as a history keeper, as a time immobilizer, could be the field where the shadow of the subconscious, as the shadow of inherited organic information, mirrors itself as subconscious, as consciousness. I'm sorry, I will repeat, I will go over this sentence again. The two phenomena, mirror and shadow, cling together when we speak about art. Art as a history keeper, as a time immobilizer, could be the field where the shadow of the subconscious, as the shadow of inherited organic information, mirrors itself as consciousness. What impressed and reassured me the most during these years of interaction is the fact that both artists and scientists have similar quests to attack. And these are intimately related to the fact that they share the same time and space slot in human history. Their lives and brains are occupied by similar questions, similar problems, similar dilemmas, each of them doing their thing in the specialized form of their discipline. I often feel sad and lost because of the distance made by progress the last centuries between all these fields of human behavior, of all these pointed interests and labor. Richard Feynman in 1963 complained in his book The Meaning of It All about the fact that the 20th century so far was already the last scientific in human history, which means that everything got scattered, diffused and torn apart by forces aiming at expertise and efficiency. As it is now, artworks became societally constructed self-regulations that present themselves as beauty and truth. Experiencing such artifacts creates a connection between those who recognize beauty or another overarching consideration as a structure and need in order to keep their conscience clear. Artifacts and so-called elegant scientific conclusions are that which remains from the contemporary shamanistic journey that artists and inventors undertake. Is the artist's life as an alternative to a common life relevant, or are we speaking of a contemporary utopia? I think not. Whereas society is continually reorganizing itself according to the growing number of its elements, the generative forces that dehumanize are unleashed. Every positive progress is countered by an equal amount of negativity. This is the artist's biotope. Not every human being can afford to be an artist or to live as an artist, but every human being can make art. Incidentally, the human being was artist first and the human being later. Human perception depends on a complex of cultural and psychological factors. Investigation on the evolution of visual perception shows that the history of art forms is intimately connected with human patterns of behavior. The process itself of looking probably has stayed the same through different periods of time. What changed was the interpretation, the internalizing of the images. This means the same as the reproduction of those images virtually and in the real world. Civilizations tend to develop their own artistic concepts. That influences all persons living within the given historical period of their existence. And now, I'm sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. We're running a bit out of time, so may I ask you to go towards your conclusions, please, so we have enough time for discussion. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I will then skip, and then I will go to my conclusion. Yeah, the philosophical, social, political has bared a monster named contemporary society. To relate oneself to it in an autonomous, critical and lucid way and interact about these processes regularly with the rest of the world is, in my opinion, the task of scientists, artists and other outsiders. Science is in constant motion. So is the evolution in the arts. Artworks, however, from the moment they are finished, stand still. They create socio-energetic necessary endpoints and fresh perceptual benchmarks. Their core is to create other meanings in matter, to alter perception by collective contemplation, to induce reflection, deepening, reopening. I am convinced that scientific insight in these processes can disclose new possibilities for future ways of making art, to make art socially relevant again.
Thank you so much, Anne-Mie, and thank you, Johan, for both for your presentations. We now open discussion. We traditionally ask our speakers to ask a question and comment each other's talk, but then please feel free to raise your hand and then I'll call you and invite you to ask your question. So, Johan, perhaps would you like to start with your question?
Yes, thank you. There's one question that I've always wanted to ask Anne-Mie, but I think this is a good occasion to ask it. That is, in retrospect, why did you want to engage in this collaboration? And what did you hope to get out of it? And then looking back, has the collaboration delivered what you expected? That is, I think, a very interesting general question to start with.
Yes, I have to say that Eddie Dove had to do a lot of effort to convince me, because, of course, as I said from in the beginning, I was very interested in exchanging things with scientists, and they were very interesting people that I encountered during my whole life, but it never came to to any participation, actually, because I always felt that in the scientific world, art is regarded as something for free hours for like entertainment, actually, like philosophical or psychological entertainment. And they don't take us seriously, not as experts, but anyway, in our field we are experts to be, and we are very necessary in society, as scientists are. We have the same, and of course, when I never liked the psychologues, I have to say. So psychologizing about art, I had and what I experienced in my in my life, that sometimes you have, because I actually never had the possibility to meet psychologues in real life. So that was a challenge for me. I thought maybe this is good, that I finally can find out why I'm so feeling appalled by all these psychological words that are attached to artworks in general. And of course, this nuclear medicine was also interesting, but I didn't know anything about it. But I found out it was interesting because I was then immediately talking to Koen van Laren about shaman, and he didn't know what it was. He never heard the word in his life before. I thought this was really, I was really struck by lightning. I thought, how is this possible? An academician in his late 30s, because early 40s, never heard, how are these worlds separated? Everything is so separated. And I made him buy this book, Altered States, very interesting book. And he was so happy that he could read about it, and that he learned a lot. And it was the same with the books that I got from Johan, you know, and with his after images, that was, of course, so interesting. Actually, I was in the IKVAB, where we both are, in the academy in Brussels, where we both are members of. For the last 2 years, I was the director of the class of the arts, and I invited Johan as the first speaker to speak about, and actually all the other artists, like composers, architects, everybody, they still speak about it because it's so interesting. And also, normally we don't get in touch with lectures or insights like these kind of what Johan. So, and what I learned about, it's weird. I cannot, because I'm actually I'm speaking. I can speak, but I never speak what it's about. It's very. That's why I'm in my lecture. Also, it's very difficult for me to make a lecture like this. And what I can say is it made a big impression, but because I see it in my work, the work I'm doing. Yes, it changed my life in a way, because I had a very, very bad idea about collaborations between artists and scientists, and I have now the proof in my own life that it can be different.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anne-Mie. Do you have a question for Johan?
Yeah, maybe the same. Yeah, of course, I heard what you... do I have a question for you? Yeah. Maybe I have a question. Do you think there are different kinds of artists?
And that's a very general question. Of course, artists differ a lot between the disciplines within the arts, but if the question is about differences between visual artists, of course, in terms of styles and ways of working, there are big differences. But yeah, what I said in the beginning, I think, at least from my point of view, what I see in most visual artists that I know personally, they are also driven by questions. They also somehow want to dig into these questions in a completely different way, perhaps, than scientists do, but they all have this fascination that is shared with scientists, and we pursue our endeavor in a completely different way, but you do feel a commonality in interest. Of course, the ways they... No?
It's not what I'm asking, no, but maybe I should I ask another question. Yeah, like you use a lot of images during your talks, and sometimes the works are good, mediocre, and sometimes they are very good. And why do you choose? Why you make a choice? Because I think there is some kind of like a lot of people, they have they agree on what is very good, you know. And do you think that it's necessary that when you do experiments like that, you only use good art or also not so good art?
Yeah. Okay, now I get the question. Well, when we do experiments with visual images of artworks, it depends on the research question how we select the artworks and the images. So sometimes it's more about the visual factors. Sometimes it's more about style and content. And depending on that, we try to select a number of, for instance, paintings or photographs that represent the bigger class that we want to make statements about. But when it comes to collaborating with artists, for me, more than the objective quality or reputation of the artists is the fact that they're open for the collaboration, that they really engage in the collaboration. So I have to feel a commonality in interests and spirit and engagement and investment in the relationship. That for me is more important than how high I would rank them on the ladder of, you know, how famous they are and how expensive their artworks are. But I often, when I use images in talks, I often take the ones that illustrate the phenomenon best, regardless of whether it's really a top artwork or not. So it varies a little bit from context to context. But when it comes to the question, would you like to work more exclusively with really top artists? Maybe yes, but I think that not all of those would be interested in this type of collaboration. So, and another thing that I wanted to say as a final comment is, if you want to collaborate, of course, you work with the people around you and that are in your network, and you can't approach just anyone. You know, I've just seen recently an exhibition of David Hockney in Beaux-Arts, which was really excellent. But I don't think I would be able to approach him and ask, would you like to collaborate with me? You see, I mean, so yeah, it's a pragmatic response, maybe.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Marina, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you both very much for your fantastic presentations. I enjoyed them a lot, really. And I had a question for Johan. In your research, were you mainly interested in creativity? I mean, in how people create art versus lay people? I mean, professional artists versus lay people. Do you think that your findings, specifically on prefrontal cortex activation, do you think they will be generalized if you ask artists from other types of art, say poets, to write a short poem or a story in a PET scanner? Do you think the results will be generalized? And also the second question is, what about connectivity? Did you analyze the connectivity? Because you said that the main difference between the results between artists and non-artists was the level of activation. So did you analyze the connectivity between different brain regions? I'm just curious if there are differences in connectivity between artists and lay people. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the second question because that's easy. No, we did not look at connectivity. And yes, I agree that would be interesting. The first question, are brain areas involved in creativity shared between different areas of creativity? Actually, it was one of the departure points, the fact that I think that visual artists engage their brains differently compared to, for instance, literature or music. Some of the areas might be shared if it comes to general mechanisms of creativity, but I do think that the visual and the motor components are very important in how visual artists make drawings, for instance. The way Anne-Mie talks about her drawings is really like being triggered with a little visual thing in her environment, and she immediately takes it off and starts drawing around it, and it goes more or less automatic. She refers to the subconscious if she talks about her drawings. And the fact that you can see some of that in the PET study, I think is really interesting. A second, last point, just a small qualification. I wouldn't say that what we have studied is the creative processes behind making artistic work, because really the type of drawings that people make in the scanner are starting from these little seed elements that you get as a visual input, and then you take it off. And I think Anne-Mie was one of the few who was able to draw something that she could also draw outside of the scanner, so to speak, whereas most people really struggled making nice drawings, and most of them actually complained that this was not really about what they usually do in their artwork, like Koen van Mechelen, who's more of a conceptual artist working with, you know, breeding chicken and all that sort of stuff. He just didn't like it. He really hated being in the experiment because he said that what he was doing in the scanner was completely different from what he normally would be doing. So I wouldn't make the point that this was really about creative brain mechanisms behind making artworks, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nick, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I am in awe of the ambition of your study. I think it is remarkably ambitious and almost unattainable. I share your fascination with the links between art and science, but perhaps art with a small a. Science doesn't have a capital letter. Artists and scientists are approaching much the same issues of representing the world, but in quite different ways. And the approach that I have taken over many years has been to look at the question from the opposite direction to you, that is, to look at patterns, I won't call them artworks, patterns that are shared by artists and scientists, so that one has essentially the same patterns, and then to examine the language in which these patterns are described in art and science. The particular interest that I started with was op art, which is very, very simple geometrical art, but it produces fascinating visual effects. The question that I was fascinated by is, how do artists who produce them and scientists who examine them look at these same patterns? And what is really remarkable is that you can find almost identical patterns that have been used in scientific experiments and hang in galleries. And the question then is, how are they describing them? Are they dealing with the same phenomena? And one is faced with the issue of the difficulty of finding a common language between art and science. And so there are plenty of examples of similar works, but the artists describe them, as would be anticipated, in their traditional artistic language, using terms that would not have equivalents in visual science. And the scientist equally addresses the works with their language, which is impenetrable by the artist. But there is virtue, I would argue, in looking at equivalence in patterns and differences in descriptions. Because under those circumstances, what you find is that the thing that is binding the artist and scientist is the pattern. They're dealing with essentially the same patterns. And then one can try and examine the differences between the languages they use to describe them as saying something about the methods that they apply. And as Johan mentioned in his talk, the scientist is almost always trying to simplify the stimuli that they use in their presentations. The artist is almost always trying to complicate the stimuli that they use in their, I call them experiments. I treat every picture as an experiment, and it's an experiment that people work from, they grow from, they decide what the next one will be. But in the case of op art, you do have a commonality of the starting point, the images that are used either to produce or to examine the consequences of. And I wonder if there is scope in looking at some of the brain imaging works or the experimental works or the picture appreciation works in looking at similar patterns that are produced by these two disparate disciplines and examining both the responses by artists and by scientists. I'm sorry if that was a very long question, but I think there's quite a lot embedded in it.
Was that a question for Johan or for Anne-Mie or for both our speakers?
For both of them.
For both.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief so that Anne-Mie also has the chance to respond. A few things. One is I do appreciate all of the comments you're making, and I share them very much. I think your view on equivalence in patterns and differences in language, I think, is a very interesting one. I don't think that it applies to all sorts of art and not all sorts of visual art. So op art is a really nice example, but I think more generally, it's true that artists and scientists could have an interest in the similar types of patterns. I think when artists make drawings or patterns or paintings or whatever visual art, it's because of the things they say, you know, in terms of the visual qualities of it, and they try to speak to an audience, they try to express their feelings and thoughts. So it's all in the picture, so to speak, and the pattern itself should be taken seriously. And I do think that it's their way of communicating, and then afterwards how you talk about it is a completely different approach to the image, I think. So looking at visual similarities and similarities in patterns, I think, is an interesting take on trying to discover the similarities. And of course, the differences in language have more to do with education and tradition, and I'm not so sure that they reflect the deeper meaning or the deeper understanding of the images. It's often a way of talking around them that don't get to the essence, I think. So that's what I wanted to say. Maybe Anne-Mie wants to add things.
Yeah, I want to add something, because actually I think that thoughts and ideas, they are also physical facts, actually, that they are made of the same substance of what we are made, the flesh is made from. And I think that what I said before, that we are part of the same slot in history. So we are dealing with the same things, and we have each our specialized way of dealing with the problems of daily life, and that extend to, of course, like the daily problems of your discipline. And I think it's kind of normal what Mr. Says, that the patterns, that's actually the thing that connects us. And these probably these patterns can be, I don't know if we can see them now, but maybe in the future people can also prove that you see these patterns, that once they are the same patterns are translated by by visuality, and the others by just conceptuality. And yeah, it's because, you know, I have very much problems sometimes with sleeping, and I see the thoughts in my inner eye. They are and they have sometimes different shapes, and I see them. Yeah, I see them. And sorry for the time that I see them. It looks a bit like the Mayan imagery, you know. And but of course, it's what Mr. I don't know your name is saying is an obvious. It's something physical, actually. You understand? That's why the imagery of shamans, it looks like pop art, like the imagery that Indians 2,000 years ago, they worshipped images, and actually it's the negative spaces between the images that they had a healing function. They wove them and they wore them, and they had a healing function also to look at them. And that is what you are talking about. You see, I hope that you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, it's the subjective visual effects that you were describing, that shamans describe, that how they go back to prehistoric designs.
No, but it goes back to what is here, what we are made from. Yes.
Yes, certainly. And I was interested in, when you were talking, you mentioned about after images, which are very, very basic visual effects. We know quite a lot about why they occur and what generates them, and how long they last, and the changes that they undergo. And I was fascinated that you were introducing these into your notions about art.
Yeah, but it's Johan Wagemans who was, that's his topic. It was his topic of interest when I got to know him. Johan? No?
Well, I did mention them in some seminars that I gave, and I gave a little bit of an overview of the research, but it was not that I studied them so much. There's other people in the visual sciences that are more experts in this area, I would say, including Nick and others.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I can see that Brian has his hand raised, but just before passing over the word to you, I just wanted to ask Anne-Mie, because Nick said that in his opinion, scientists try to simplify things and artists try to complicate things. And I wondered if you agree with this statement.
No, not at all. Maybe it seems like it, but it's not a really willing thing that you do. It's like you have. It's like a little bit the very best. Sometimes you make very good things, and it's really always after a moment that your life, your thoughts, everything is scattered, like with schizophrenia, But and it's not possible. I cannot do. And then all of a sudden, these things turn around, and you make something very good, very simple. And that, of course, are the best artworks, And so what you are talking about is the not so good art. Me also, sometimes I make really things a lot. I make a lot, but not everything is art, and not everything is good art. But there is also Duchamp who said, also bad art is art. So yeah, that's but what maybe we should there is this thing about good art and not so good art, and why do we say that? Because as the same with scientists, we strive for things to make that have this simplicity, this so-called evidence from the moment it's made. There is some kind of some kind of a line of before and after, and that is what happens with a good statement in our good thing that happens in science, but also in art.
Thank you very much. I think that was very interesting to hear. Brian, please, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I suppose this is directed primarily at Johan, but and what I'd like to do is in some sense take a step back and think about what perception is for. And I'm going to, I'm afraid, disagree with Nick. I don't think it's about patterns. I don't think it's about color or any of these things. If we think about why we have perceptual systems and not just vision, the other senses as well, it's in order for us to extract information, and particular information, its meaning in the affordance sense. That that, and especially if we think about it in the comparative sense of looking at the perceptual systems of other animals, I think we're far too human-centric here. The reason why we have perception is not because I'm looking at Johan's face as a face. I'm looking at that look of disbelief on his face about everything that I'm saying. I'm joking, of course, but do you see what I mean? Perception has to be about meaning, because that allows me to act in an appropriate way, rather than thinking about perception in terms of images, representations, and so on. These things, I mean, we have to extract low-level information in order to give us the ability to extract meaning. But that surely, at the end of the day, is the whole purpose of our perceptual systems. And sorry, and as a final point, it brings together then art and the things that we do in human experimental psychology, human experimental, because obviously art is all about meaning. And not just in terms of visual art, in terms of music and so on.
Oh, I'm not so sure. I do agree that perception in general for most animals is about extracting meaning. For many animals, it's about adaptation and survival. So affordances and all the things that form dangers or food are crucially important for their survival. So I agree with that part. But then to say that all perception is about meaning and also art is about meaning, I don't agree with that. I do think that visual art has a lot of additional value in terms of the visual qualities that are not just about meaning. When I look at the painting by Picasso, I wouldn't just say, oh, the meaning is a woman, so let's walk to the next painting. I mean, you're intrigued by the image as an image, and that is also often what artists do. They do put a lot of things in the painting that are really about the visual aspects only, the texture of the brush you see, the surfaces you see. They don't just draw things as we know them. They suggest things, and that I think is what fascinates me the most in visual artworks, especially in paintings. The fact that there's so much more than just the meaning of things. It's also about the visual qualities and the patterns and the textures and, you know, all the things you can see, the ambiguities there. Ambiguities are not good for survival. They're not good for perception in general, but we do like them when we see them in artwork. So I do think there's a mismatch between perception for survival and perception and appreciation of artworks. The reasons why humans make artworks and the fact that we enjoy them so much and pay money for them, I think shows that it has added value compared to everyday life, I would say.
When I may say something, I think completely the opposite, actually, because you know, it's just that when I'm in the world and it's a daily, we have a day to go through. When I make things, is actually to find meaning, you know, to it makes the meaning of the what I'm making is the meaning of my life, and actually, yeah, it's completely different. It that gives the meaning to what I am, and it's through the artwork that you are looking for meaning. But of course, maybe we have to think about what it means, meaning, you know, what it is, what you mean about when you what you say when you use the word meaning. It's yeah, I've written actually a lot about it last days, but I didn't put it in my talk here. But I think that's actually when I say this thing about before and after, this, like Eisenstein calls it Zwich, and it's actually the moment when a new kind of meaning appears. And it's all maybe you can always say it's by accident, but it's not by accident. It's a lot of labor has gone before, and there is a meaning that comes out, and that's actually where I'm doing it for, you know, that there is this meaning popping up. And the weirdest thing is that sometimes when I make work, practically always, you make something and you stop when you think it's enough, but not, you don't have the idea of it's good or so. But then when you are showing it to someone else and you're looking together with these other people, the other person to your work, all of a sudden you start to understand the meaning of what you did. And I think the meaning is actually the point where we are having contact, where we meet each other in the physical world, thanks to things that happen in the physical world. And that the meaning has nothing to do with the mental world. I think it has really to do with the thing in the world, being in the world and seeing things have an evolution in the world. That's how I see it.
Thank you very much, Anne-Mie. Johan, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Anne-Mie, when she was saying the things she was just saying, is it possible, and it's an open question, is it possible that for you as an artist, the meaning in the way you described it is really the most essential thing? Because for you, it seems to be a way to bring things together that you struggle with in your daily life. And then if it fits together, then you say it's a successful artwork. So for you, meaning might be something different than for a person who looks at it from a completely agnostic point of view, not knowing the struggles that went into it. So is it possible that there's a mismatch between what is important in the artwork for you as an artist and for the perceiver, the art lover, when they look at your artwork? And in relation to that, also the thing you said about good and bad art. For you, good art is where it all fits together and it suddenly provides meaning. Whereas for a naive person, what they find good might be completely different for different reasons. Is that possible, the mismatch between artists and person looking at it?
I think for good art, there is an understanding by everybody. Because what is there, even the cleaning lady, she knows what she sees immediately. She's attracted to something in an image, you know, that appeals to her and that she wants to see again and again. And it's just some kind of something that appeals to something very old and atavistic even. You know, like a good artwork has an atavistic thing in it, and also something that is with the now and the future. And that is, and also I want to say that with this struggle, actually, I don't find it as a struggle. I think it's a wealth. And I go to my studio and I start and I do things that I like. And of course, you struggle to get it right at the end, to make it finished, to get it finished. But in the beginning, it's all happiness. And but of course, when you wouldn't do it, then you collapse as a person. Then you would degenerate or die. So it is a struggle, but it doesn't feel like a struggle. I don't know if that's an answer to your, but it's something. Well, I don't know. I cannot say more about it actually now, I think.
Perhaps a way of reconcile those 2 points that seem kind of different. It's the fact that you find meaning in the way you represent things. So in a way, the visual element of, at least in visual art, like the artistic research for certain aesthetics and for certain forms, is in itself a way for the artist of finding meaning, because ultimately, is not simply in what is represented in the artwork, but actually the way the artist represents certain things that kind of helps that meaning making. So basically, the visual qualities and the perceptual qualities of an artwork already carry that meaning.
Yes, it's an ideal combination of the material, of the concept. The size, the way you use the materials themselves, and what you see, and that's a whole. It's a combination. It's like I say, it's some kind of a self-evidence that is there and that was not there before, and that you can undergo. But it's actually a very new combination of elements actually. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a good note to end our conversation. Marina, would you like to remind us our next seminar?
Yes, thank you very much for such an interesting discussion. Our next seminar will be next week. We'll be discussing art in context, how different contexts affect the way we engage with art. So thank you, everyone. Now, I guess we are ready to stop the recording, I think.
Yes. Thank you very much again to our speakers and everyone who attended.